maske. Jaz mislim zaradi tega, ker je nerazločen sred govorjenja, imam jaz dol.
Tudi zaradi tega smo dali kot narazen, da pač izpolnimo temo.
Bomo pa pazili, da se ne bomo razumeli in pljuvali na daljavo. Vem. Okay, welcome to the panel discussion during this year Slovenian Film Festival of Slovenian Film. Today's discussion, the title is Cinema 1.5, and we will talk about the need for accessible audiovisual content, how it is becoming increasingly vital factor in today's reality, how it's changed during the COVID, and meanwhile social distancing requirements changing distribution routes, not just exhibitors' business and also spectators' habits, in ways that necessitate significant adjustment from distributors as well as audience, as I said. What are the implications of this for the market? What will the future of cinemas and festivals look like? And what do new distribution models and VOD platforms entail? So answers to these questions will be explored by today's guests. So we have 4 guests today. First, I would warmly welcome Andreas Rothbauer. He's a sales agent from Picture 3 International. Welcome, Andreas.
Hi there, thank you.
And then with us is Igor Stankovic, distributor from Megacom Film. Igor, pozdravljen.
Oh, hi to all of you.
And next one is Jure Maticic. He's the president of Art Association Network of Slovenia Cinemas. Pozdravljen, Jure. And Leo Predan Kovarski, the leader of the Slovenia base of Slovenian
Film Database.
Slovenian Film Database, and he's also responsible for the whole project, and he's keeping a good care about our heritage and film information system. So I would like just to participate like we feel it, but before we go to what COVID really changed in our reality, in our perspectives, maybe we will start with that, how screenings at the cinema going versus watching video content at home. So are cinemas already losing the mail, or will they die, or how these habits are changing? So maybe you as exhibitor.
Angliščini? Okay, so the funny thing is that as I'm speaking for Art Kino Mreža, that's the Art House Cinema Association, and for my cinema, that's Mestni Kino Domžale, it's a small cinema by all accounts. We've just come from our best season ever. So basically the art house sector is growing. The numbers are going up, and it's been a steady process for a decade now. So basically we have 20% market share, which is quite unprecedented in terms of art house cinemas in a European context. So basically cinemas are doing okay, at least for our part of the sector. So that's the cinemas not selling popcorn, that's the cinemas doing event cinema concepts, that's cinemas screening art house films, doing film education programs and stuff like that.
And these numbers, like 20% of increase for art cinema audience.
Oh, that's 20% market share.
Market share, yeah, okay. But the numbers this year, because of all the regulations, will be, so predictions are that Slovenian box office, or, you know, all the admissions will be like 25%, or?
That's probably about it. We've done a bit of market research with our cinemas. So the statistics are saying we have about 25 to 45 percent of what we have last year. So it's a significant drop due to limitations, of course. Everyone's limited to a low capacity in terms of seating. We couldn't have as many screenings as we planned because of the security situation. You need to have larger space in between screenings, so you can clean the auditorium, do everything, kind of make the air fresh and everything. And we were closed for 2 months. You know, it's a big fact. You know, starting up a cinema once it's closed is it's quite a heavy task.
But okay, cinema attendance is increasing, so that's good. And what's the reason for that? So why people start to appreciate more, you know, like this going to art cinema? Because we all know that all the visual content, you know, the quantity of that is enormously, it's growing up every day. So what is this key points that people still are saying, no, I will go to the cinema, I will not stay in my couch and just watch?
Well, I still think it's the social contact. It's the fact that you go to an auditorium and watch a film with other people. Then, of course, it's a program. We still are exclusive up to some point. The window still exists, so we do screen films before you can get them on the internet, or if our country is concerned, to be downloaded illegally, mostly. So we do have a bit of an advantage in this field. Everything else is basically down to curating really good programs and doing all the other things around those programs. So making it accessible, making it nice, pleasant, basically be a nice place with a nice program.
Igor, as a distributor, do you agree with that trend, or how do you react to that, you know, about the content, about the films you try to provide to the exhibitors, to the cinemas?
We are just facing, let me underline that from the very beginning, we are just facing something what never happened before and probably will never happen again, but how it will look like in the future will be also somehow completely different like it used to look before. So providing films, there are two different options, channels actually, since we are distributing Hollywood and representing Hollywood studios in one side of the business. We are as well probably the biggest art house distributor of European and worldwide non-commercial films. So being a distributor of Hollywood films, not significant. There are not significant things which happened there. Everything was supposed to started in a way, and now everything is postponed. In the other hand, independent titles, art house, festival films, they are big room, big. I'm not going to call that niche now because it's not niche anymore, where those films are trying to find place and struggling for capacity, playing slots into the cinemas. Now there is no niche for those films. Now there is a big empty room which these films could fill up into the art house cinemas, but as well into the commercial multiplexes too. It's not easy, but it's not hard as well at the same time to provide these films, because emptiness of the cinemas give us an opportunity to fill up the cinemas with our content. We were closed here for 5 months. And in a day, once when the cinema has been opened, we all, with anticipation, we expected cinemas to get open, and the results at the very beginning were good, but so far from the numbers we had before. We are as well on the 25-30% from the numbers we had last year, but some of the independent films, European films, works even better than they worked before. So far, without festivals, which were canceled, many of them during the summertime, early autumn time, which is now, we cannot say that it is good. And also, we are lack of films, so we are just releasing those films which were supposed to be released in March, April, May, since the new films from festivals are not available yet. So we are witnesses that the Cannes film selection films waited some other festivals such as San Sebastian or Toronto to be released, and Venice films now are not available for regular releases because those films, Venice and Toronto films, are now waiting other festivals there to be screened and so on. And we are lack of festivals. Many of them are just happened there online, and many of them are canceled. Many of them are, some of them are with really tiny and small number of films. So yeah, it is complicated. It is easy in a way. There is no many films which we are competing with. And in the other hand, it is really complicated because we are lack of new products and we don't have festival platforms which we used to use for promotion of that kind of films.
Okay, so the situation, you know, this ratio between arts, cinemas, and blockbusters or major films are similar, like in Slovenia. So in Serbia, the same. So, but what about the domestic titles? Are they also
Good
getting?
question. Good question. Now we have an initiative to release several domestic films, because if domestic films will not gonna save the cinemas now, we cannot really count that independent films will gonna save cinemas in that capacity. So we are now pushing producers to be brave, to be courage, and as well at the same time with the government and institutions are making some strategy, those films to be supported to be supported in promotional activities, and as well somehow maybe in some other way by some financial direct injections to call that that way. And now really by the end of October, the entire November, beginning of December, domestic films will be every week, at least one of domestic film will be in release. Some of them are big ones with big commercial capacity. Some of them are smaller ones, but they will all have that good treatment in the cinemas. And let us cross our fingers that these films will at least keep the flame burned and cinemas remain open.
Good. Maybe Andreas, if we add you in that process. So we were hearing about how it was during the distribution from the exhibitor's point, but what on the sales point? So how this market, you know, the communication changed, that's just will be delayed, all this COVID effect, or you already face it, or?
Well, I think from the international sales part, we actually were the first ones to be really affected by the whole pandemic situation, and that already started in Berlinale as well, when for the distribution and exhibition side in Europe, things were still pretty okay, I think, you know. But what we faced from Berlinale on was basically that a lot of our Asian buyers already did not appear, and the Asian distributors that are our clients and to which we license films, they make quite a significant part. So from Berlin, we already faced combined, I think all of us sales agents, we already faced a heavy loss. So in that sense, we were the first ones to be affected. And overall, I'm actually surprised by the very positive statements of you guys, and I'm happy about that. But from our side, I can pretty much tell you that over the last 6 months, we had an average turnover drop of around somewhere between 40 and 60% to the previous year. So that is very, very significant for us as sales agents combined as well. And the situation over the last months, okay, one thing is the communication, and you have to get used to Zoom and everything, which is a good thing, I find, because it was long overdue. You know, we relied for so long on our analog and physical model, which is still very important. But I think what we learned over the past couple of months was that actually it is possible to also communicate virtually in whatever sense, you know, and it's good that we made that learning curve in general. Unfortunately, it was for let's say, a bit more tragic reasons, because the numbers as such in terms of selling films, they really went down. And as you guys said, you know, the cinemas were closed, distributors were not actively really heavily acquiring foreign content, especially of like art house festival films as well, because they simply did not happen. So a lot of the films got postponed, and now there is actually a traffic jam of a whole generation of films, you know, that are lost, because already the next wave of films is coming. And obviously the festivals want to play the new stuff and they don't want to play the old stuff. So there's a whole kind of lost generation of films that are sort of stuck in the middle of nowhere as well, which is also another little tragedy. And for us, it means, you know, that we were lucky in the sense that we are also representing films where we not necessarily need to find theatrical distribution in all the territories. So a lot of the more mainstream, streamy films, we are actually able to sell into platforms, to sell into television. But the theatrical side of things, especially on the art house distribution arena across the globe practically, was pretty down, and is only just slowly starting again. And then the only thing that really saved us was the fact that we were able to sell content into alternative platforms. For art house films that need a festival to get, you know, to get the reviews, to get the promotion and all of that, it's pretty tragic, because if an art house film, whatever that means really, but if an art house festival film doesn't have the festival for its promotion, it has a big impact. I give you maybe an example. You know, we had one film that was in the Cannes label selection, which is a German film called Enfant Terrible, about it's a biopic on a legendary German filmmaker of the 70s and 80s, Fassbinder. Probably you guys know. And despite, there was a lot of interest, obviously, and people liked the film, but we also got a lot of, for the past months, you know, yeah, but we cannot make a move now because we cannot release the film, right? And at the same time, we were holding back, and we were not showing the film then to press, because we didn't want to go to the press before we have a physical premiere. And then Enfant Terrible also became a little bit part of a festival politics, because Venice, for example, clearly said, if you go to Cannes, we won't take you. And San Sebastian said, well, we're only going to play a handful of films, but they were in the Cannes selection.
Classical dilemmas.
Toronto scaled down its lineup from 250 films to 50 films. So another lot of films were jammed. So now Enfant Terrible, we sold it to some territories, not as much as we would have normally done. And only now we are starting to have the first physical festival platforms that are going to be confirmed. It's going to be the opening film or whatever. Tallinn, it's going to play in the Sevilla competition. It's going to play in that competition and so on. So now, with a delay of almost 5 months, we are starting to try and reactivate the interest in an art house film that normally we would have sold in a physical way. We would have sold it practically right away to pretty much everywhere.
So what do you think about, you know, generally, you know, this could be a tricky dilemma, you know, like skip the theatrical release and going directly to the video content. So it has its disadvantages and advantages. So in which cases is that okay, or is that acceptable also from your financial business as a sales agent?
I think it's not an alternative, you know, for a lot of I mean, we have to face the fact in Europe that we do, for the majority, what is considered art house films, right? Either they function domestically very well and don't go anywhere else. We have those local blockbusters, right? Where in any kind of European country, or the films that travel are mostly art house festival driven films. I don't think platforms are an alternative for those art house movies, because the platforms are simply not extremely, there is not a real concept that makes money-wise sense for a platform to acquire art house content and to pay you the amount of money that normally theatrical distributors that are buying all rights, including theatrical, are able to give you. And the few exceptions, be it Amazon or Netflix, or that kind of put up the right amount of money, they are also more and more retreating from licensing content that has domestic releases, because what they want to do is they just finance movies and they make originals, and Netflix presents out of it, and they don't have any restrictions. But that only applies not to so many films, right? So for art house films being the majority of European production overall, platforms will financially be never an alternative. You know, we can play them on platforms and European initiatives, and there's a couple of European platforms, a Mubi and Flimin and you name them, you know, but they don't pay anything really, we have to honestly say. So economically speaking, not an alternative. And in terms of visibility, also not an alternative, because the outreach those European platforms have is very limited. And the big platforms at the same time, they usually don't buy this kind of stuff unless it is an exceptional kind of production. For example, we had also, I'll give you a concrete example right now, we had a local Austrian film which has a German star in it, if that exists anyway. And we were planning to go a very conventional way of, you know, releasing it in Germany and Austria and then bringing it to the international market. And then COVID started and we felt already, oh, wow, this is not going to go anywhere. So what we did was we spoke to Netflix with no territory sold and no release in place ever. And they read it within a couple of days and they said, we love it. We want to have the whole world and we don't want to have any theatrical release. We're just going to make it a Netflix original. And we were the most happy guys in the world because they paid the entire production budget plus X amount of money on top of that. So we said, this is fantastic. We could never make this kind of money in a conventional way. And in particular, in this dramatic situation of COVID and theatrical distribution and exhibition not existing, it was just a perfect situation. But that's, you know, that doesn't happen on a regular basis.
Asking, okay, you win, but what does it mean for art houses who potentially lose one of the good titles? So, Jure, this is the other impact, the other point of that?
What I just wanted to say is that we're not overly optimistic about things anyway. The way it worked for us when we opened, there was a huge shortage of films anyway. So this basically old art house titles that were already everywhere. Basically, you can't run a cinema on that. That's just not the right sort of programming. I mean, what we think is that some titles should go directly to VODs and everything, because what we were facing was a shortage of available slots in the cinema. There was too many films and too little screens. So we were thinking about doing our own VOD anyway. And this is something we will do eventually, maybe in a very short time, because for us it will be a viable thing. It won't take over the business, of course. We're not saying that, and it's quite obvious. But it will be something that will supplement our physical business, basically. So trying to compensate the lack of space that we have.
Kind of upgrade.
Yeah. Basically an upgrade, yeah.
Leo, you wanted to?
Yes, well, I wanted to jump into what Jure is saying, because what you maybe didn't mention in the beginning, my primary occupation is I'm a filmmaker. So this is an important maybe topic for filmmakers, for creators, because going directly to VOD for us when making a film that's meant for the cinema is, for me at least, and I can dare to say all filmmakers, is a very, very big disappointment. Yes, I mean, the film is shot to be seen in the cinema, and also it's important to talk about the cinema not only as a social event, not only as something that you go out and do, but you can never recreate this experience anywhere. It's not, I mean, unless you have your own screening room, which let's say nobody has, or very, very few people have, these home cinema systems and all that, it's not the same. So it's important to note that I think in these difficult times, And after maybe these difficult times, there will be a moment where countries or maybe governments and politicians will have to decide, because economically it's already not very viable, the cinema, the screenings, the real life movie theaters in Slovenia at least, and they will have to decide whether to support this type of experience or not. And I'm thinking that even in countries like ours, it's not only with the cinema, it's with the production as well. So there would be no Slovenian feature films on a professional level unless there was financial support from the government. And so if the government says this is not something we want to support, then there would be nothing. And it's the same with the cinema, I think. There will be a time where there will have to be a decision. Is cinema something that we want to keep alive or not? And I think as a filmmaker, it's very important, even though the Slovenian Film Database is providing also an on-demand service and making available content digitally.
I can totally agree with Leo. I mean, there's one thing watching a film on a TV or on a screen or on a telephone. The other thing is watching it on the big screen with good sound, good projection, in quiet and everything. It's just something completely different. It's two different films, basically, two different experiences. But I think, a cinema was and still is a viable business model. I mean, there's money to be made, that not just subsidies to be given to support art house cinemas. We were having quite big percents of ticket sales still in the whole share of the money that we put away in a year. So I think it still will be a viable business model. Just depends what sort of cinema. Maybe not the popcorn and Coca-Cola cinema, but coffee and cake cinema. There's two different concepts. And that's the one thing that's been the most on our minds right now, is that the lack of audience in the 40, 50 plus section. Those are the people that are still afraid to go out, to go to confined spaces, to go into crowds, to go into a venue and be with other people. They're still afraid. So I think this sort of feeling of fear will have to pass, be it with a vaccine, be it with the pandemic quieting down. And that's when we'll see the real situation. I think people will return.
Yeah, I strongly believe that. But listening to Leo, there was one, very daring question. So, do you think that the filmmaker will start to change their vision? For whom they're making movies, for VOD or just for a cinematic, like artistic experience, as we talk about. Also, in a matter of a content, Jure mentioned. So, the main spectators of the art cinemas are going up by ages. So. And this kind of, do you believe that it will be so significant that also these corona and pandemic circumstances will have an influence on that, or we will survive that without changes?
I think there's two aspects to this question. The first one is the fact that content from the beginning used to be made for different formats. So when shooting for cinema, let's say, you would shoot differently than when shooting for the television. And this gap is actually closing now. You have much more cinematic content in the TV industry. The new series are amazing sometimes. They're not this classical, TV type of content. So in this regard, of course, the gap is closing, which is nice. So content is becoming more cinematic with the passing of time, with the better technology that's available at home for viewers at home and all that, bigger screens. However, the second part that you mentioned is what's the audience, or for which audience films are going to be made. And this is always going to be an economical question, I think. And already you can see that Hollywood is right now producing, all these blockbusters and all these superhero movies, Marvel movies and all that, and much less of more serious content, let's say, because the younger audiences are more prone to going to the cinema, and the older audiences have moved to series, and the series are becoming more serious, more this art house. Of course, I'm not counting art house cinema in this, because this is art house cinema is not only driven by economic motivation, but in Hollywood, let's say, it is a lot like that. So that will always be present, I think. There will always be a question: which audience watches which content the most? And then if your motivation is purely economical, you will always make that type of content. But there will always be also diversity, I think.
But do you believe, and also maybe Igor, if you include you as a distributor, so would the future of these blockbusters, you mentioned all the big studios now are oriented toward this comic release, by the strips, Marvel, DC, and everything. But I have a feeling that the audience these films are made for are not so keen to go to the cinemas. They're more turning into the video content. So it seems like for me that they're producing tons of movies with tons of budgets for audience which will stop going to the cinema, and on the other hand they don't care about the cinema audience which will maybe start or learn more to appreciate that.
We are just in the time which is really difficult and to predict everything how it will be in the future. So I just can say that now it's maybe something frozen. So it would get unfreeze, then people will start living their lives again. So we have closed cinemas, but cinemas and VOD platforms are not jeopardizing themselves. They are supporting themselves. So that is the same talking about the future of the cinema, and we shouldn't be that pessimistic. We just should stay alive and to survive this time, this period, because no one can say that tomorrow, once this crisis will expire, will disappear, that cruisers will not be place where the people will go and spend their vacations. So that people will stay in their yards making barbecue and will not go for the regular vacations where they used to go. So the cinema is the place like the cruisers are. So cinemas will exist in our lives and in the future as well. But we really need to make an ambient cinemas to survive, because cinema is not only the place where films are shown. Cinemas are the place where the people are hanging out, where people are going for an event, going to the festival, talking between each other about the quality of films, what they've seen, how they like some film, and so on. Kids are not going to the cinemas because of popcorn or Coca-Cola or Pepsi. They're just going, they're going there to watch some films which they cannot watch in the other place, but as well to be part of the company, of the group, and to make their life socialized, which is really important. So platforms, in the other hand, are great, are perfect, because we can watch some films there once when we are unable to go to the cinema. So we have an access. Our life is not complicated anymore. It is now at this point, but it's not complicated as it used to be before. To watch some good film, you should attend the market. You should grab a ticket or be invited by sales person to go there for the festival screening or for the market screening. Now simply you can watch some film via link. So if we are talking that video on demand is jeopardizing the cinema attendance, we should start in going back that we were those who started watching films on links. So we are partly guilty because VOD is that popular now. But in the other hand, without watching films on the links, we couldn't recognize which film is good for the festival, which film is good for the theatrical release. So big films are there. There are a lot of films with big budgets, which some of them are going to the platforms. Some of them are waiting their releases, but most important, tomorrow, films could not wait, because like Andreas mentioned, actually, films could not wait. There are other films which are in the pipeline coming and replacing and waiting to be released. So some of those films is better to be released now on platforms than to wait some better days, because at those better days will be other films. We are witnesses as well that Cannes film selection this year was kind of strange, with not that many big names, but okay, that is reasonable because there was not an official screenings of those films there. But at the same time, a bunch of directors has been postponed releases of their films waiting next Cannes. So we will have more films than ever next year, once when hopefully, and we really should believe in that, all of this is gone. So the bright future is definitely as well, from my perception and perspective, is bright future is for the cinema tomorrow, but bright future is as well for VOD, bright future is for the festivals and everything. We just should survive and be patient, remain healthy, safe, and normal.
Thanks.
I completely agree. But I would like to just put what you're saying. I agree with this completely. But it's very important to put it always into the perspective of one's surroundings. So if you look at Slovenia right now, we don't have a very strong cinema going habit among the population, because cinema goers, cinema audiences have been neglected for so many years. And this can really, really affect what you just said. So meaning that it might be true for the whole world, but it might not be true for certain parts of this world if they don't, or if we don't help to establish this kind of thinking. And this is why I think it's very important to also educate audiences why it's important to go to the cinema, why this experience is different, care about the quality of the projections, the quality of the sound, because in Slovenia there is a lot of problems with this. And as a cinematographer, I can tell you that these mainstream big multiplex cinemas are not really taking care of this. And then some people, even people that have nothing to do with the cinema, come up to me and ask me, "You're a filmmaker. Why when I go to the cinema, why is the quality of the projection worse than on my big screen
The
TV
picture
at home?"
is dark and
Yes, the picture is dark, the sound is awful, and they notice this, and then they don't want to pay this, I don't know, €7 to go to the cinema, because to them it's not an experience anymore. So, and this is a very, very important problem in our country, at least. And the second thing is also, it's important, I think, to have to give the cinema the exclusivity that it deserves, because cinema will never have the amount of space for the movies as much as VOD has. VOD has potentially infinite amount of space, amount of screening rooms, but the cinema only has 1 or maybe 12 in the best situations, or maybe some huge multiplexes have more. But even that is very limited. So you can project 12 movies at one point at the same time, let's say, and there will always be new films, like you say. There's always be more. So I think that certain content, especially content that is made to be watched in the cinema, should have the option, the ability to be exclusive in the cinema. That's, as a filmmaker, I think it's very important, and I think then it can really, this ecosystem of VODs helping the cinemas really, I think, can flourish and coexist.
yeah. So I think, yeah, it's good to stick with this positive attitude, which Igor mentioned, with your additions to, adapting to the local systems, like local ecosystems. Maybe just to include also Andreas again. So, for example, if this pandemic crisis will last a little bit, so how do you see to present, to sell movies, and also for Igor to buy movies as a distributor for the next form of the festivals? For example, if the Berlin will be cancelled, now it is confirmed, as I know, but if it will be, can it survive? Can the festival survive in this like Zoom dimension, virtual dimension, or will we have to find another way to find this link between not just audience and the films, but also between the distributors and sellers and producers, of course?
Yeah, well, I mean, everything you guys said it draws a very complex picture, and it is a complex picture, and there is so many factors and aspects to the whole thing. I would like to address them all, but then I would be talking for half an hour. Overall, I can say, given I'm German, maybe I'm less optimistic than you guys are, which I really appreciate your optimism. I'm afraid. To also end on a positive note, I don't think we should just survive. I think we should use that moment to really rethink our model and to improve our model in order to really save theatrical distribution and the exclusivity it deserves. But in order to do that, it takes a couple of also painful cuts in a way. I'm speaking of the overall European situation and not so much your regional situation, but cinema is heavily funded in Europe, heavily funded. And only to give you an example, in Germany, it's incredibly heavily funded. And it's only cinema that is funded, not TV, not platform content or anything. It's the cinema that is funded. And the result, despite all the heavy funding that we have produced, is terrible. We are producing in Germany 220 films per year, which is too much in itself anyway, and no market can absorb that. And the result shows why. 80% of those 220 films in Germany, 80% of those, they don't make more than 10,000 theatrical admissions in a country of 80 million people. This is a disaster. And
Should I recommend
40%.
Should I recommend that you put 5% of this money to the Slovenian film production?
Yeah,
which is
no, happily. I mean, from my part, I'm totally okay. And then of those 220 films, not even 40% have an international sales agent. You know, so those films, if they play anywhere, they play at a festival or 2 or 3, and that's it. You know, so meaning culturally and economically, the visibility and the sustainability is simply not there. And Germany might be a dramatic example, but it's not the only one. There's also other high production capacity countries that have a similar result. So I think we have to work on something, because the pressure from public funding is not getting less, it's getting more. And we need to produce better results. And to produce better results, we need to rethink our models. And it might be different in different regions, but overall, our result is bad. Now, festivals, they play an important role for films, but if art house distributors overall in Europe and worldwide will not be able anymore to acquire and release content with the similar results than they had before, then there is less and less reason for public funding to put money into films, because only to produce a film for about 1 to 2.5 million average cost, depending on the European country, is not justified by just playing the film in 10 film festivals. This cannot be the fate of a European film, to just play at 10 festivals and then go somewhere right into the middle of nowhere. So, but theatrical distributors, and especially art house distributors in Germany also, they are suffering badly for the last 6 months. And I assume it's not just the German art house distributors. So we have to see the long-term impact of this pandemic, even if there is a vaccine or whatever, right? The financial impact this will have is long-term. And a lot of the cuts that those distributors are taking now will impact on how they acquire films in the future and how much money they spend on it in the future. And the audience-wise, in Germany, we are also very bad in going to the cinemas. We go 1.5 times per capita per year, which is terrible, right? The Irish go, I don't know, 7 or 8 times per year. The Germans 1.5. I don't know how it is in Slovenia. But the audience now is gone, and it's gone for art house films, and it's gone for mainstream films. Apart from films like Tenet, you know, that worked in Germany. But for example, this Enfant Terrible, the Cannes label film, was just released on the 1st of October, was one of our films, art house film, Cannes label. Did not good. And at the same time, we also had a release of a very mainstream film, God, You're Such a Prick, with Til Schweiger. 500 prints, a film that normally does somewhere between 600,000 admissions to 1.5 million admissions on average in Germany. Now, not even 40% of that. So it hits art house and mainstream at the same time. Festivals are important, but what we should really focus on, I think, is not just having festivals, but we have to make films that actually have the opportunity to enter into a commercial distribution. And it should be theatrical for cinema films. We should also becoming more flexible with regards to other exploitation windows. But what we definitely, in my view, have to do is we should not just survive. We should use the fucking time of Corona to really rethink our models and to get in shape. And I mean that on a distribution, on an exhibition, on a sales, and on a production level. And finally, on a funding level, because they are heavily putting money into this, because without funding, European film practically would not exist.
Igor, your comments, what's the situation in your country, and remarks to Andreas' attitude? Just to make microphone. Mic.
Okay, so yeah, I should really remain positive, because this is not a situation, okay, this is something which happened now, which happened maybe in a year or two, but going back and going actually further, the things will be much better. Okay, agree with in some points. It's going to be really tough for some small art house independent single screen cinemas to survive, because we were passed through really best period maybe of ever, with all of the subsidies, with everything there, those cinemas to remain open and worked well. But now our success should be turned towards keeping at least 1, 2, 3, 5, 10% of them keep alive them, because we would need that kind of cinemas in the future too. But at the same time, we shouldn't only work and care about those cinemas, we should care about our colleagues. So from our perception and perspective, people are as well worried. And believe it or not, in my cinemas, I am the one who is going there to the billeters and the cinema operators and telling them that the things will be okay, should be okay. We are just a part of the industry which is now facing some troubles, but we are not the only one. The hotels are empty. The resorts are empty, theme parks are empty. I've mentioned cruises are actually not even parked, they are somewhere in the open sea, are just waiting for better time. So the airplanes are down there, so we are not traveling anymore. So we were changed our lives, but when this will gone, we will go back, and more than before, we will be ready to spend our times outside, to travel, as well to go to the cinema. But we really should be turned to keep, if not all of them, most of those small art house independent single two screen cinemas to remain and to stay alive, and also to save salaries as much as we can on the level as they used to be before, and to save our colleagues from losing their jobs, because this is something. The future is not maybe bright in a short term, but a future will be bright in 2, 3, 5 years. Since cinemas are not foam, films are not shot only for a season, cinemas and films will stay alive. Okay, before I used to know to say that cinemas without films are just popcorn stores, but it is obviously cinemas without films are not even popcorn stores. So, but films without cinemas are films, but not on the main platform, which makes people together, which brings people together at one place and makes them happy. So talking about Hollywood films, those are films which attract some audience. Talking about festival films, those are films which attract audience. So if you ask me now, where do I grew up in my film life? I grew up in cinemas. So that means that I grew up well, and we should really work and care that upcoming generations to grow up well like we used to grow up. So this is really, I'm really trying to be optimistic, because year or two comparing to 50, 60, 70 years of professional life of all of us is just peace. Just a piece of sand into the desert. So really, year or two is nothing comparing to that. Actually, what we did and what we're gonna do what we were gonna do in the future.
So embracing your positive attitude. So it is not necessary to think that multiplexes and cinemas and everything will have to change in the long term. Like, for example, because these COVID restrictions or everything, the style of life, which are we now limited by, will go for going on. It will not just last just 2 years. It will maybe come another COVID 18, 19, 21, 22, 23. So we are now at that position that we still believe that it will pass just a few years, and after that everything will go as normal. So multiplexes will be full, approximately full as again. So they will serve their purposes, or they have to be retransformed at the way of the distribution and all the market.
Yes, because those are cycluses. So the new audience will start coming to the cinema like our parents, grandparents did before. So this partly cutted off chain will be easily bypassed, and the new generations will also find a place where they can hang out with their couples, where couples can hang out, where families can go together as well. So really, I believe this is something. Okay, if we are going to be depressed that this will last forever, we're not going to last forever, because we are stronger and we were past many other things which were last even longer than it is actually now, and it will last in the upcoming months. But definitely one day, can you still imagine the life in 2, 3, 5 years that Real Madrid plays versus Barcelona without audience on the stadium? Can you really, can you imagine that thing? Or can you imagine that to sitting in a restaurant where the waiters comes with a mask? No, because this is something we are just facing now. It used to be different kind of crisis. It used to be different things which were affected other industries. Now we are in the center of this problem, which is affecting, and actually we are those who are facing the most horrible reflections of this crisis. And we should remain strong, but again, I'm just repeating, normal and positive. This is
Andreas,
the only option.
Andreas, add your German point.
I fully agree, and I don't want to be too pessimistic. And I think we should be positive. But what I'm saying is, I think we should work on something, because this has an impact, and this impact will show for a long time. Because you mentioned all the other industries and how heavily they suffered. So economically, we will be impacted, not just the film industry, which is just a tiny little part of any national or European industry. We're talking about a much deeper economic impact in other way more important industries, economically speaking. So, and I'm afraid this will last longer than we think. And what I'm saying is, we should not be pessimistic, but what I'm saying is we should try and think of what can we do to make our beloved film world, make it sustainable and bring it into a future, because it will, in my view, it will not be the same. You know, it will have a severe impact. And I can tell that if I look at my 13-year-old twin girls, they have abandoned television. They have almost abandoned cinema. If I and my wife would not take them to the cinema on a regular basis, because we are cinema goers and we are cinema lovers, in other words, if they wouldn't have that education, they would have abandoned that as well. What they know is a platform from their mobile, from their iPad, from whatever. We have to educate them. Let's go back to them. I think this is where it starts, because if our kids, if the upcoming generation is not taught that this is a different experience from watching a film on your iPhone, then we are losing them, and we are already about to lose them, and we have lost already a lot of them, and we have to get them back into, because it would be a shame if cinema is just something that happens in a museum.
So are we as a society putting enough effort to educate, to show the younger audience the value of the cinema? So, or do we do enough?
I think, at least in our case, we're doing quite enough. I mean, we could be doing more, of course. About a third of our audience are young people, at least in Art Kino Mreža. And we're quite proud of that. That's also our problem right now, because we don't have really any school screenings, and with limited capacity, there's less and less. But what we are doing is teaching young people about film culture. What's the difference of watching a film on TV, and what's the difference of watching a film in a cinema? The communal experience, basically. That's what we're trying to teach them, and basically make them enthusiastic about film. It doesn't have to be very theoretical and academic. It just has to be a way of basically make them enthusiastic about
To
going
give them
to the cinema.
experience.
Yeah, just for the experience, for the film art as a whole, basically. And we've been doing that without much subsidies, basically. What you were saying, that European film, well, you said European cinema is heavily subsidized. Yeah, that's very nice. That's goes for film production, but not really for cinemas.
Not in Slovenia.
In most of our cinemas, the percentage of subsidies, 10% or less. Everything else is ticket sales and other means of financing. So basically, we've been surviving without subsidies up till now, in a system or in a country that doesn't really have a system that supports cinemas as it should. We weren't supported in times of the crisis. So basically, we were surviving on burning reserves. And that's what we plan to do, I don't know, until the end of 2021, I suppose.
So based on that, we have kind of advantage because we are not so strongly supported from the other sources, which will get lower also in the Central Europe because of this economic wave will probably affect it, as Andreas mentioned, also in the film industry. While if the global economy doesn't go up, if they stopped, so it will have a effect after that. But Leo, you are the youngest member of the audience, so your comment.
Yes, well, I'd like to say that I completely agree with Andreas. It's very important to take this time to observe what's going on, because even before this current epidemic crisis, the situation in Slovenia was far, far, far from perfect in terms of audiovisual and cinemas and films and all that. It's important to look at what is going on now, and try to make things better. And of course, kudos to Art Kino Mreža, who have been supporting and educating the audiences for the last 10 years. But I think that on a national level, on a higher level than Art Kino Mreža, there is not much going on about this problem, and this is something that we really need to address as soon as possible. And also, it has to be said that even though the subsidies for film are, of course, a little higher than for cinemas, in Slovenia the subsidies are really, really, really low. The funding for film is in a complete downward spiral, and of course, it has to be also said publicly that Slovenian filmmakers have not been paid for past projects. And have been waiting for some of them have been waiting for even more than just this time of Corona, but even since before. So we are really in a really bad place right now when it comes to the whole audiovisual sector.
Yes. If we can come to some kind of resolutions about our discussions, so we can and we should stay optimistic, but as all we agree in that time, also in this not perfect time or catastrophic time, we have to find the new ways of solutions, or not just to wait to be everything as was it before, because probably the things will never be exactly the same, even if all these restrictions are gone and everything. But I think it's the most important thing is to focus how to, as we said, drag the younger audience to not to forget or not to lose the touch with the cinematic experience, and also from the market point, not to stop to pointing out that how important all the funds and everything are for that production, because as you said, you're okay, you can survive now with just 90% of your own income, but it cannot go for long-term relationships.
Right now, it's not a viable business model anyway. So as I said, we're burning reserves, and we can only do that so long, maybe up to a year or something, or maybe less. But basically, it doesn't only go for the young audiences. Young audiences are a problem anyway. They were before.
Yeah,
it
not
goes
just
to
Corona
all
thing,
the audiences that need to come back.
But okay, the good thing also, as Andreas mentioned, it's that during the Corona or because of Corona, this like kind of gap, we have a lot of films still waiting to reach the audience. So maybe Andreas, this big quantity of movies you will probably force to sell for lower prices or or just not to, but at the same time the new films are producing, so we will have for the new festivals, for the new reopening, the new titles, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get pessimistic again, but I'm afraid a lot of these films, they won't find representation by sales agents, and ultimately they will, of this lost generation of films that unfortunately happen to be ready in this terrible Corona window. And if we don't take them into international representation, they ultimately will also have a much harder time to find commercial distributors in the various territories. So I think, I hope for those films that they find some kind of outlet, and maybe the festivals is some kind of alternative scenario. Maybe auxiliary windows, be it a platform or television, will also help a little bit. But overall, they are going to be lost. And what I would like to say, given my message, is one of the things I think we can do, or we should do, is on a very high level. And we have to change the framework conditions, because as the colleague here at the exhibition said, a large part of the funding goes into the production and hardly nothing goes into exhibition. And let me just agree with you, for sales agents, there is almost no funding. The real beneficiaries of public funding is the production sector. Even in Slovenia, it might not be such a good situation. And they're also eager. A lot of money on a European level goes into the domestic distribution. But we are overlooking a couple of sectors here. And what we can do or should do is in each of our countries to work on the national frame line and the guideline of film politics and how films are funded, how many are funded, why are they funded, for what purpose are they funded. Because right now, we have a situation, to make it too simplified, we're producing a ton of films and we are not thinking about what's going to happen to them in distribution and exhibition. And this is, so we are producing stuff without a real goal in a way, right? And I think that's what we should do, because otherwise, as I said, we're going to end up in 50 years and we can watch films in the museum because nobody else cares anymore, commercially speaking.
Yoga?
Yeah, and just to top that off, what cinema really needs and what drives people to the cinema are films that are going to fascinate them. You need good films for the cinema. You need fantastic films. You need those really brilliant films that will last and will stay with you. So what we are lacking right now is those films. Throw them at us, please. We haven't been getting them for half a year now, and it's really not working. So basically, we need the films. That's more important. That's even more important than subsidies right now. Films.
Igor, for that point, you are still optimistic as a also distributor. There are such
we need films, but we need cinemas to remain open. So definitely, yes. Let me summarize my optimistic approach. I'm an optimist. I'm definitely an optimistic for all sorts of reasons, but I'm pessimistic and realistic in the short term. So it's going to be a year, maybe 2 years before we really see a recovery, and nobody knows when it will be actually by the end. And for those who don't have the resources, financial resources, like probably Andreas do have, or maybe you Slovenian guys as well have, it's going to be really incredibly difficult. And I'm really worried about that. And like I've mentioned before, for the multiplexes, and I'm not worried for the multiplexes because multiplexes are somehow secured by the banks, and they will not gonna fail, and they will not gonna, maybe they will gonna close their doors, but they will be forced to open their doors by the side of banks tomorrow and shopping malls and or whatever. But I'm really worried about small independent cinemas that have been growing, and they've been so successful recently, and now they should close their doors. So so really we should be positive and think that the best place for films, which we need definitely, all of the kinds, all of the sort of films we need in our cinemas. We need blockbusters, because there are those who are attracting one kind of audience. We need festivals to happen. Okay, these hybrid versions are good, but we should leave with this life. Once when you sit in Germany or traveling by plane, you are sitting just next to the other. There is not an empty seat in the plane. There is not an empty seat in the train, but people are wearing masks. So that is possible, and we are fine with that. So cinemas are as well safe places, more safe than restaurants where we are spending most of the time, and as well walking on the street, waiting on a traffic light for a green light actually to across the street. Cinema is more safer place than those places, and cinemas should remain open. Cinemas could not be open without films, so at least we need to get some products. Domestic films are produced to be screened in the cinemas, are financed by the government to be screened firstly into the cinemas, then afterwards in all of the other platforms. So we should closely work with the local producers to get their products now, even if it is not right, perfect time, domestic films to be released, but better to be released to save that cinema, to save cinema, to keep cinemas open, than to wait some better days, better time, once maybe cinemas will not even be opened. So conclusion of all of that, I'm definitely optimistic, but in a short term, pessimistic, which is more realistic.
Thank you for a summary. I think we all agree basically with that. And I think that we can kind of finish it with that with all the points all the things we mentioned or pointing out. And maybe we can use this COVID situation or this more isolated times, like, is it true that artists are creating better movies, better arts when they are like not in a very hedonistic atmosphere? I'm kind of joking, but I'm trying to be optimistic like that we can use this time really to also hope that more good movies will be produced, will be filmed. But as Leo probably also want to add it, of course, you cannot produce the film without the money. So yes, it has to be the existential hygienic minimum for the production has to be assured. And on this, we all rely for the outsource financing and everything. So yeah, at that point, if anyone wants anything to add, otherwise I will...
Yeah, just a conclusion.
Yeah.
Cinema is very adaptable. It always was and it always will be. The mission is to stay alive, to keep the people that work with us, so highly trained, this professional people that work in cinemas, they should stay there and they should still work in film and in cinemas. And that's the way to kind of move forward and think of new ideas and invent something new in maybe a year or two. So that's the only way to survive.
I'm sorry, I have to reply to your comment about artists. I think artists should not starve under any circumstances.
Agree.
Because what we do is a job, and we should be paid fairly as anybody else and have the same rights and everything.
Totally agree. So yeah, we stay focused on good movies. Yuri, as you said, we have to keep it alive for the next generations, to show them, to not to lose this experience we all, thanks God, have in our childhood and everything. And I think that, yeah, let's hope for the best. And as Igor pointed many times also, we have to survive, and we just not just survive, we just have to think optimistically, aware that, okay, this short period maybe is not so optimistic, but for long term we have to be. And because also the film is part of the culture is part of the society, and we will be very poor if we lose it. And we all, I think, will fight. And I'm very grateful that we share today all the different opinions from the different sectors, like filmmakers, as you said, as art exhibitors, as a sales agent, as a distributor, and everything. So if we all agree with that, I think there is still a bright future for the movie in generally, and also, let's hope, in Slovenia also. So thank you everyone for participating, and see you in the cinemas, on the festivals, and anywhere soon.